go to Silent Pines forever. The first time someone warned Mara about Silent Pines, they smiled like a person sharing an inside joke. The second time they said it and left, the smile had thinned into something curiously vacant. She came back because towns have files and people have papers, and because Aunt Elsie's apartment smelled of peppermint and old paper. The warning, scratched across a postcard in cramped letters, had been pushed under the satchel on Elsie's kitchen chair. Don't go to Silent Pines forever. Silent Pines was paler than Mara remembered, streets washed of color, as if the town had been bleached by patience. The motel on the corner still kept a bell that sounded hollow when she rang it. The clerk, a woman with an apron and watchful hands, slid a thin file across the counter, as if sliding a tray of bones. The file contained room numbers, dates, and a few brief notations, no explanations, only the neat script of people cataloged into absence. Neighbors remembered different things. A man at the diner recalled Aunt Elsie's laugh, but not the last time he'd seen her. A woman on the bus could describe the pattern of Elsie's teacups without remembering where she'd set them down. Memory in Silent Pines felt selective, like a room stripped of its furniture bit by bit, until the shape of absence remained. Mara began to notice small objects that belonged to no one yet felt intensely personal. An unclaimed glove on a fence post, a child's unreadable drawing pinned to a telephone pole. At night, the pines leaned in like eavesdroppers. Mara would wake to the house settling and to a faint map of sounds, footsteps that didn't belong in the hallway, a low rustling that seemed to come from somewhere between the bedroom and the kitchen. She found a reel-to-reel recorder in a box of Elsie's belongings, its tape threaded and labeled with dates that stopped exactly 5 years earlier. When she pressed play, a voice came back that sounded like a version of her own past. Soft, cautious, running through a list of names that thinned and faded into static. The tape had been recorded in pieces. A voice, sometimes Elsie's, sometimes a stranger's, read fragments of town records, lists of birthdays, and the briefest phrases. Remember to mail, left at noon, do not take. Between the phrases were long stretches of tape where the sound thinned, like someone had let their mind drift, and the recorder captured a hollow. Once, a line repeated until Mara felt her name being tested on it. Mara, Mara, Mara. And then the tape swallowed the syllables whole. The postman delivered postcards with a practiced gentleness. He did not knock, he slid the cards under doors and never looked back. His handwriting was always the same, looping and neat, but the messages varied from ordinary, found this old stamp, to urgent. Do not leave names unspoken. He spoke in sentences that suggested rehearsal, telling Mara where to look rather than what she would find. When she asked him how the town had become this way, he steadied his gaze on the sky and said, "We learned to keep the edges tidy." Mara began to test the town, setting small traps for memory. She wrote the names of people she'd grown up with on slips of paper and left them in public places, a bench, a laundromat dryer, inside a library book. Sometimes someone would find the slip and hand it back to her like a returned library charge. Other times the paper would vanish. Each disappearance tightened a knot in her throat. If a name could be lost by casual attrition, what held identity in place. The question felt less theoretical with every missing slip. Her own reflection became an unreliable witness. In the mirror above Elsie's dresser, Mara found messages not in ink, but in the absence of her shadow at the edge of the glass. Once she pressed her palm to the mirror and felt a cool, papery resistance, as if a page lay between her and her reflection. At breakfast, she came across a note in Elsie's handwriting, not addressed to her, but about her. If she asks, tell her the pine keeps a ledger. Names are its currency. The sentence made her mouth taste like pennies. People left silent pines, of course, or they thought they did. There were photographs, smiling faces at last year's fair, a ferry ticket stub, a list of bus routes that recorded departures like proof of having tried. But the town had a way of sliding its fingers into those proofs. A photograph might return with a blurred face. A ticket stub would reappear folded into a drawer, as if time had decided the journey incomplete. When Mara followed the bus route to the edge of town, the road folded in on itself and came back out under the same trees, exactly where she'd started. She met an old woman at the library who called herself a keeper of margins. The woman moved with the slowness of pages turning and told Mara that the pines listen for the syllables that make us. She explained in metaphors, cutting a name out of a sentence until the sentence forgot why it had been written. When Mara pressed for how to resist, the keeper shrugged, tapped a book spine, and said, "Names are habits. Repeat them aloud until the wood gets tired of listening." Mara tried it. She walked the streets at dawn and said names into the hollow air, neighbors she'd known as a child, strangers whose faces she had only half seen. Her voice sounded thin and surprisingly loud. For a moment, the town answered back. A single window opened, a kettle hissed, the squeal of a swing on an empty playground. Then a laughterless hush fell, and her words felt eaten. When the name she had been saying for comfort, Aunt Elsie, came back when she least expected it. She turned and found nobody there but the shape of a chair in a kitchen, still warm. The town's ledger, whether real or imagined, began to appear in corners. A thin ledger book tucked beneath a floorboard, a list of names on the back of an old menu, someone's careful needlework listing birthdays in faded thread. When Mara found a list with a space after each name, as if a carrot awaited a missing note, she felt both relief and a vertigo of responsibility. She started adding names her mother's, a childhood friend, scribbling them in the margins, as if ink could pin memory to place. But the ledger was not simply passive record. It was a negotiation. Every time Mara added a name, she felt an answering slackening somewhere else. A neighbor who once waved no longer looked up. A song on the radio changed melody, as if tuned to a different era. Names seemed to be currency that needed balancing. In the dark hours, she began to counting aloud. Not only names, but small facts, her birthday, the details of a scar behind her knee, anything that ensured she had a shape that could not be clipped away by polite forgetfulness. There was a night when Mara thought the pines answered. She stood at the edge of town, where the asphalt meets the loam, and shouted a name until her throat stung. The trees gave back an almost word, a susurration that could have been a correction, a rephrasing. Then The ground underfoot felt suddenly less like earth and more like a stage, everything in its place for observation. For a second, she believed the town might let her leave if she could prove herself stubborn enough to hold onto her voice. When she woke the next morning, there was a postcard on her pillow. The postman's handwriting sprawled across the back, and the message was short and exact. "You shouldn't try to bargain with the pines." Below it, in a different hand, tremulous, as if written with a different memory, another line. "We tried to leave once. They kept our stories. We came back to check the shelves." Mara sat with the card pressed to her chest for a long time, feeling the thinness of paper as both barrier and balm. In the end, there was no dramatic choice, no final confrontation with a creature in the trees. There was a slow testing of limits and a small, private rebellion. Mara packed a bag, tucked the postcard and the ledger into it, and walked to the outskirts with the sound of her own name repeated under her breath. At the town sign, she paused, listening to the pines like someone eavesdropping on a long conversation. The road ahead did not loop this time, or perhaps it did, and she did not notice. She walked until the air shifted, and she could no longer tell whether the shift had come from leaving or from finally deciding not to be silent.